come here for the ride, the thrill, and that's the density of the human experience. And then the density of human experience, there's not knowing, there's uncertainty, and there's emotions. And I would say, don't fight it, lean into it, enjoy it, because like when you're not embodied, you have a much greater knowing. There's kind of closer to omniscience, like stuff, but there's also the lack of emotion and stuff. And so there's a lot more, I think, just acceptance of it all and everything else, more connection.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of The Soul Inspired. Today, I have something different. We have Dominic with us today. He's a coach of consciousness, as he goes by, and he helps people become more conscious. So, we're going to talk all about that. First of all, thank you so much, Dominic, for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I was really excited to have you on. We were mutually introduced, and I have a feeling we have some common interests. So this will be a fun experience just to talk to you and to see, what your life is about and the things that you do. With someone like yourself, when I hear coach of consciousness, I want to dig in more. I want to know what that means exactly. But I look at who you are as a person, and I'm wondering if you were someone your whole life that was in this space that you currently hold right now with the work that you do.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about this starting off point before,
Mhm.
but it just occurred to me why you asked, like, have I always been like this? And, you know, I think before I've heard this question, I said, well, no, like there's some things that happen, but there wasn't a singular event. But I will say, speaking of childhood, I do remember like some instances where, I just, I guess roughly I would say, someone did something that I thought was unfair. And I think when that happens, a lot of times people go to, particularly children, they go to a place, well, it's me. Like this, it's because of me this is happening. So like if I was just better, if I had just acted differently, then this wouldn't have happened. And
Mhm.
so I'd say that starts to kind of like a performative nature within a personality where it's like, I'm going to do this so people will like me.
Mm.
And I do remember quite distinctly, several times when I was younger, I had some, we'll say some impingement on my activity, or you say bullying or something. And from like the very beginning, I was like, wait a second, this isn't about me. This is about you. Like
Mm.
you have something going on with you. And it wasn't from a place of hatred or like, I want to like hurt the other person. Definitely want to defend myself.
Mhm.
But, I think I've always had the perspective of, I've got my stuff going on and other people have their stuff going on.
Mm.
And so, not that I knew the person at the time at all, but, there's this guy, he's passed away now, but Ram Dass, spiritual figure. He says, what people say or think about you is um, their business,
Mhm.
but how you react is your business. Um, I think Osho may even go as far as says like, what people say about you is none of your business. So, so that's, I think, from what I can say, it's probably a different outlook like I've had from a lot of people that I've encountered because, people I work with, I can identify those events and I'll help them say in those events in childhood, and I'll be able to help them see, like, do you see where you actually made this about you? You found yourself deficient. You found yourself lacking in some
Mm.
way. That was the misinterpretation. That was the misperception that started this whole cascade of events and what you're experiencing right now. Um,
Wow.
now, now I would say like I myself became more conscious, I would say, when I actually started managing people. Um, because I think so my dad had a management style which was like you do it because I told you to do it. And my dad's a wonderful man. He's passed, had a big heart, but he had his stuff. And so I was kind of like that. And then you didn't recognize it, right? That's not going to be any leadership of, that management style. But I was more of the mindset that, come on, you know what to do, just do it, get it done by this date and stuff. And I, after a few months of doing that, I realized, well, this is not working. And it was really surprising to me because up until then, I think there's a term individual contributor. I wasn't managing people. I was just doing my work. I was doing well. People are like, great job, everything else. But I didn't really need to depend on anyone else. And so when you're managing, like you have to depend on the whole team. In fact, you're doing it wrong if you're doing the work as a manager. You need to manage in such a way that other people are inspired to do the work and actually do a really good job. Um, so I gained something. It's a slice of emotional intelligence. I'm sorry, it's a slice of consciousness. I gained just a wee bit of emotional intelligence, and I actually took more interest in the actual individual. I say, hey, what's going on? Are you feeling okay today? How's your week been? Oh, hey, you said like you had some things going on with your parents. Is that all right? And so before we start talking about the work, I would do what I could do at that point in time to build a rapport with the people I was working with, and I started getting much better work results. So I'd say it started out as what we call like called tactical or strategic, and I said, oh wow, this is more effective than what I've been doing, and then it actually became something. I said, oh, I enjoy this. I actually enjoy finding out more and more about the people, and then other things that I found out. And like I said, this is growing in terms of like, how I became more conscious. I started realizing, oh wow, people really have stuff going on.
Right.
And it's not to say I didn't have my own stuff, but I'm just like, yeah, it's like, I want to be this way and I'm this way now. Okay. But I get to accept myself right now. That was always the tape playing in my head. I was like, no matter what's going on, I get to accept myself right now. And I must say, and I still have issues with it, but like I knew that was always like what I'll say the right thing to do. Say, accept myself as I am, and if there's some changes I want to implement, work for that as well. And so when I was other people, they just stopped at like, well, I don't like myself where I'm at right now. And they would just kind of cycle there. And they knew they want to be something else, but because they couldn't accept themselves where they're at, they couldn't really move forward. I think there's a guy, maybe Carl Rogers. I know quotes. I always forget who gave them, but he says, once I accept myself as I am, I create possibility for me to change.
Mm.
And so that's something I actually started with the managing and stuff. I said, hey, it's okay. This is where it's at right now. In fact, let me jump in. Let me help you. We'll do it this way. It might be bad right now, but we're going to improve over time. Like you're going to get better at this. And I said that's fine. You're learning. So I would say, that's the genesis of where, me, I'll say being conscious or becoming more conscious was at.
Yeah, no, and I love that. I have a couple questions around it already. There's a lot of related. I said there was going to be some relation here, like as soon as you were talking about different things. The first thing I wanted to say, and I love how you shared how when you were a kid, how you were almost, you didn't know this yet, but you were becoming aware of others' perspectives, like during, when things were going on. I had the same thing where if I watched other kids getting picked on, I've said this in multiple shows, um, I had two things happen. The first thing that I would question is why are they doing that? Like, what's
Yeah.
the end goal? Like, why? Almost like I didn't join in on the festivities of bullying, or I never was part of it, or I never got a kick out of it. And then
Yeah.
and then the weird, I remember having that same perspective as a kid where I would think for the bully, the person being rude or mean, I would sometimes even I wonder what's going on to make him like that. And I thought all kids thought that way, but that wasn't really the case. A lot of them were kind of victimizing themselves in those cases, right? Like I would think, or even if I was picked on, or if someone tried to pick on me, which didn't happen very often because I shut it down pretty quick, and I think I scared people. I scared people with my words or my reactions. Because kids generally are kind of like, "Whoa, what's that?" Right?
Yeah.
But it would be like, what is happening in that person's life to get them to be in that place?
Hmm.
And those are very mature things to contemplate when you're a kid. And so when you said what you said, it doesn't, it's maybe not the exact same, but it's the idea of kind of almost being aware. Your awareness was a little more heightened. You weren't just
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah.
falling into the game itself. You were kind of on the outside looking in. And that's kind
Yeah.
of that's the perspective I always had. And I had that. I'm going to move even forward. I don't know where you were. I didn't really dig into where you were managing people. But I, again, started thinking of personally. I worked in corporate before I got into running my own company, teaching music and everything. I was working for banking and corporations and things like that. And I can remember going into meetings, and this is early 20s, and you'd have all these, what we call the big wigs, up in meetings and talking to the teams and everything. And an individual would put up their hand and they'd say something. And I would notice the manager at times would be overlooking what that person said, almost like they didn't even hear what they said. They'd just be going on. So then what would Joe do? Well, this is what people got to know me, but I'd put up my hand and say, "Hey, I just I want to just acknowledge what was just said. And I
Mm.
think this is something we could do." And I was doing this young. Now, what that did as a young 20-year-old is it made my managers not like me and not move me up. I was I was taking merit on what people were saying
Yeah.
and the feelings they had. And then what would happen is I'd be put into a team and I'd be micromanaging my manager silently. No one knew that I was the guy doing all the work, but I was helping, but they would never move me up the ladder.
Yeah.
And I left the corporate world. That was one of the reasons I left, was because I thought, well, if I can't get these people to move me up, I'm just going to go start my own thing. The entrepreneur in me started kind of emerging. So I don't know if you can
Yeah.
relate to any of that, but I was very much, some people do get lucky and they get into those management roles, and that's great. For some reason, I think I started a little hot too young. Like I was nice about it, but I'd be like, "Are you not listening? Like, I'd say it in a nice way. I'd say, like, we could try this." And they'd be kind of looking at me like, "Excuse me, I'm the guy in charge, right?" So I was always aware of people and what was going on in their worlds too. So again, I really wanted to just acknowledge that there is definitely some relation there and maybe in
Yeah.
how we've worked with
No,
people as well.
I definitely have feelings of correspondence and rapport and parallels with what you're saying. The corporate world. So I was in the place I'm talking about is like Homeland Security. So
Okay.
it's like corporate squared type thing. So it's like the apparatus of the federal government. There's a lot of rules, policies, and everything. It's kind of funny. I wound up there. It's rules and structure, although I value them. They're the complete antithesis of, like, I'd say, my own personal embodiment. But yeah, the managing thing is interesting, particularly when you're the subordinate. And I think there's a book or old one, like Managing Up. Like there's a whole game about working with your manager in order to uh we'll just say have your manager think well of you. Yeah, super aware of that. You got there faster than I did. I stayed in it longer.
Right.
But I think from the very beginning, it's funny. I was like, yeah, this is not the optimal path for me. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's what happens to a lot of people, I think, especially people who have big personalities or they have almost like a feeling of wanting to change or help the world. So what do? They go into a job and they say, okay, well, I should be a manager or I should be I got to get in charge of people. But then when they know that there's things that kind of they get stonewalled from certain changes or things internally. When did you move into I love how you say managing people because it's in a sense that's what you do because you're coaching individuals. When did you move into that arena of being a coach?
I'd say time wise, I'd say about like 6 years ago. I'd say, kind of the mechanics of it was I was yeah, so essentially I was a director of a training center. It was all leadership training. So, basic training, senior personnel, senior leadership. And most of the time nearly all the time, I was not the one teaching. I'm actually, managing the whole facility. But um, one of the teachers there, she was encouraging me to get in the classroom. She said, "You're just so natural. Like you don't even have to do all this stuff." She goes, "I have to learn all these different things. Like you could just go in there and do stuff." Um, and we had an interesting arc. I think at the very beginning, she actually told me I didn't care for you because she says I could see I don't jive with your personality types, and she shared this with me much later. But she also eventually wound up sharing like a lot of like personal things, and I was just something told me like it would be good to be like much more present with her in our conversations, and so I tried to really be on high in terms of paying attention to what she was saying, responding, following up, and this had to do with a lot of like non-work stuff, and so some things that she was processing in her personal life, and um, at some point she pulled me aside and my manager, and she personally took effort to thank me in front of my manager just to let her know how much I had like helped her process like some things. And
Wow.
it was actually some heavy stuff. And I had no idea, but I think there was an intuitive side of me that said, this is a lot for any individual to go through. And it would be good of me to give support. And this is a way not typically I don't think any supervisor like would and stuff. Little things like that. And then I said, well, since I'm not in a classroom, but I'm getting some traction here in the managing stuff, let me look into coaching. I out here like managers or frequently coaches type stuff. So I got certified in that, and then I started getting some clients. So basically, it was an interest to, I think, for me to do more, like in my own life. I'd say to become better. I always have this interest in just like self improvement. And like here's a real hack. They say if you want to really know something, teach it. And so I think coaching, and for anyone listening, like if you really want to learn like psychology, self-development, self-improvement, being conscious, I would say even becoming more spiritual. I'd say being a coach is the best way to do that because you're just constantly being presented with stuff to work through. But you have to do it from this place of complete acceptance
Mm.
and non-judgment, and here's where the spiritual stuff comes into place because, you go to the ancient traditions, like thousands of years ago, they say, the root of all suffering, maybe this is Buddhism, is attachment. It's like you're attached to something, and that's why you feel sad, or that's why you feel triggered, or shame, or fearful, and stuff. And so, if you can just be in the experience, really of everything, of life itself, be in the experience of life without having this attachment. And I would say attachment is just another way of saying having judgment,
Mm.
even having an opinion, honestly, if we go deep. Um, this is where we get into really big problems. And so, um, as I started coaching more, I figured what I was doing because I'd say I started out as general life coach, and then I was coaching everyone. And then I found, at least for my particular side of things, they say as a coach, your clients find you. So I wound up coaching a lot of women, and we wound up talking a lot about relationships, self-esteem, anxiety, insecurity. Um, how to get more intimacy, how to have like more connection. So that was like the bulk of my clients. But then my female clients start referring me to their male friends, and they're saying,
Mm.
"Well, this guy is amazing. You have to like work with him." And so I started getting male clients, and we would talk about different things. I would say, like in large bullet points, and of course there's exceptions. It's like women ultimately they want more love and connection in their lives, and men I think they want more say like respect or status or feeling of like power. Um, and so with the guys, I do work a lot on that. And typically when we get through that, at some point, I'd say later on, they start getting more interested in having better connections with their partners, let's say again, more intimacy or just a better connection.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, it's kind of the coaching arc and where I'm at right now.
You labeled yourself as a consciousness coach. So, as you're coaching, how much does having that skill set of feeling the energy of the client you're working with, how much does that make you how can that help someone become a better coach? Because I think I'm not to take away from all the coaches out there, but I would assume there are some coaches out there just kind of going by the books. I'm here to help this person. I'm going to get the information, almost like analytical, treating it like an analytical transaction, as
Yeah.
opposed to this is an individual. They have energy that they're putting out there. I'm just wondering how much of that goes into your practice.
Well, I'd say something I'm still developing. So, I have a lot of like conceptual understanding of things, and then there's reality. So, turns out that I'm a very, very cognitive type person, very like, into like mental processes. And so like, I love frameworks and models, and I use that a lot in my coaching. And I also realize that at the core of it, it's the feeling. Like what we're looking for is the feeling. So even as cognitive as I might be, I always know my clients, like they want to feel a certain way. And that's what everyone's looking for. And this is kind of like the classical coach thing. It's like whatever the client comes to you and say this is the problem, that's not the problem.
Yeah,
And
right,
so
right.
it's like, but what they want ultimately is like they want to feel a certain way.
Mm.
And so like so I want a partner. I want this income. I want this job. I want to move from here to there. And yeah, if they get that, they believe they'll feel a certain way. And so um, I've gotten in the habit, I would say, somewhat flippantly, but also to get my clients to think. I kind of like to shock my clients a bit. I'll say things
Mm.
that I'm hoping they'll disagree with.
Right, right.
And I'll say something like, here's a phrase I like when I said, listen, if you feel good, you're good, right? And and it sounds so simple, and it's like, well, no, because I still don't have the money. And I said, but if you feel good, how is that for you? And so it's just something for them to work with, but it's also to get them more, I would say, into the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
I hear phrases, I'm still not sure if they're true, but it sounds good. It says like, feelings are an experience like in the mind, they're experienced in the body, like feelings, like emotions. And I'm like, okay, we can go with that. But for sure, no matter what's going on in our head, like we definitely know how our body feels. I feel there's a lot of truth in the body. And so when you talk about uh, feeling and emotion, like I really want people to get in contact with sensation in their body. Um, Many of the clients I work with, I'll ask them, well, how do you feel about that? And they'll say, well, I don't know. And I'm really good at filling in the blank, and I try really hard not to. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'd say, well, gee, that it sounds like there could be a lot of frustration in that experience. What do you think? And sometimes I'll definitely say a word that I know it is off, like it's not the right feeling, but it's so they can themselves can like identify, go, no, it's not frustration. It's rage. That's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling. Um, and then once they can really feel it in their bodies, like a lot of times I said, well, like let's just close your eyes and let's go into it. Let's lean into it because so many releases happen with people if they actually just feel what they're feeling. It's the
Mm-hmm.
simplest thing. It's just like, yeah, you feel something unpleasant and you don't want to feel it, and you're doing everything not to feel it. And so you're chasing like the beautiful partner, or you're chasing the partner is going to be like super romantic, or you're chasing like the income and stuff. because you don't feel good right now. I said, but take that feeling of not feeling good right now, and just lean into that and let yourself experience. I said, enjoy the suck. It doesn't feel good. Enjoy the suck, enjoy the unpleasantness. A lot of times, like tears come. Sometimes they're like little tears. Sometimes, it's what they call like the ugly crying. And I just stay present with that. It's funny in life. Like some things maybe are not obvious, but so much of our experience, like it needs to be witnessed. you
Yes.
know
Yes. Yeah.
and sometimes it's okay if we just witness ourselves, and I think we should always be witnessing ourselves, but I think so many of my clients are just helpless that I'm witnessing their discomfort, I'm witnessing their pain, and if they can feel and at the same time give voice to it,
Hmm.
it's like a cleansing effect because they can actually, um, I would say the word is process a very unpleasant prior experience that has created a whole set of behaviors that they develop to not feel stuff,
Mm-hmm.
that now they actually feel it and they can talk about it, and it just brings a lot of relief. I'd say the number one thing my clients say when they work with me is like, afterwards they said, I feel so much lighter.
Mm. Yeah, it sounds to me like, just listening to what you just said, is that you bring everything to the surface. You help them bring it to the surface. I shouldn't say you do it, but you help them discover it. So if there's, I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Sarno. He was
Yeah.
yeah, so I think he recently passed, but he works with the mind body perspective and the
Mm-hmm.
idea that a lot of our physical health, a lot of our physical ailments we go through is because of unconscious rage. And so many people don't want to, especially people who are very sensitive, very empath type people. We don't want to really necessarily walk around showing our anger. And if you're not showing your anger, I'm not telling everyone to go out and show your anger. But where does it go? Right? Where does it
Yep.
go and how long does it sit? And that's what's really interesting about a lot of people is when they start to discover these things, and then they'll feel bad about it, right? Maybe they're upset that they hate being a parent. They can't even stand to say that. They're like, how could I say something like that? Well, of course you love being a parent too, but you haven't acknowledged the parts of it that you don't like, or
Yeah.
right? And those things stick inside and they stay down there, and they're just like, okay, it's okay. I'm just going to keep going, but you're not acknowledging it. You're not acknowledging that feeling. You're not acknowledging what that feels like when it comes up. So it sounds like what you do is you work. I like how the approach you have. You have almost, because I'm very on the other side of the, being a songwriter, I'm right brain, feeler, touchy feely. Like I'm really about like feeling everything. I acknowledge and love the analytical side, but I always tended to then fall back to my feeling. Okay. And I think both are really important to work within, right? Because you have to understand
Absolutely.
why the body is doing what it's doing, why the mind is doing what it's doing. And so if you're coming from from the more feely side, it's really good to get in touch with that other side. And if you're the person who's very analytical and very to the books and you're not really, it's good to understand there's something else
Yeah.
going on here, right? I don't know if you want
Yeah.
to touch on that at all.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I always feel like the optimal point in anything is balance. And so, we don't want to be too cognitive, too mental, and we don't want to be like too emotional. And so, like, I think one of the greatest benefits I bring to a lot of my female clients is just grounding.
Mm.
I mean, and that's like, the quintessential masculine essence, right? Grounded energy. And so, because I find women largely, they just have, I'd say, a much richer emotional experience, and it's good. Um, I'd say if one could choose, and it's kind of binary, you have one or the other, like, kind of like numbed out, not feeling emotions or feeling emotions. I'd say go for the emotions. It's like, because emotions, to me, they're data. And if you really lean into
Mm.
the emotions, it just really informs you on what you're feeling. And, if we get, existential or metaphysical and stuff, it's like we come here for a reason. And I'd say we come here for the ride, the thrill, and that's the density of the human experience. And then the density of human experience, there's not knowing, there's uncertainty, and there's emotions. And I would say, don't fight it, lean into it, enjoy it, because like when you're not embodied, you have a much greater knowing. There's kind of closer to omniscience, like stuff, but there's also the lack of emotion and stuff. And so there's a lot more, I think, probably just acceptance of it all and everything else, more connection and everything else. But when you think about it, so what's the point of coming? I would say it's to actually experience difficulty.
Yeah.
There's an old Superman movie and stuff, but he wanted to love Lois Lane. This wasn't the comics, but this was actually like the TV one or the movie and stuff. He wanted to love Lois Lane, and so in order to do that, he had to give up his superpowers. So he could actually really lock into that experience of loving her and connecting with her.
Mhm.
Um, and I think uh, I work with some clients who are tremendously wealthy, and they always say this about their children. Always, their greatest concern is that I don't know if my children will really understand how to apply themselves, how to work hard,
Mm.
because they have everything. And so when you think
Yeah.
about it, it's like through limitation is experience and stuff. I mean, so we're having the enriched experience by not having everything we want. by
Absolutely.
by not having like the greatest love that's easy, by not having like $1 billion like sitting in our bank account, by not having like the beautiful house that's fully paid for, that's like overlooking the ocean and stuff. Because if we had all that, then what would we do with ourselves? Now, I mean, not to say that people have those things aren't doing things themselves, but it's it, the struggle is where we really find ourselves
Mhm.
and we create ourselves. We create skill sets, we create um, capability that we can then take from situation to situation. And I think more importantly, we can take from lifetime to lifetime. And so, as one of the teachers I worked with would say, like you, and I would even say so myself, like we came into this world with maybe just a wee bit more awareness because of work that we had done previously. And so, like, clearly when we die, like, we can't take it with us, but we can take our lessons. We
Mm.
can take
Yeah.
our actual spiritual growth with us. And that's what actually persists from lifetime to lifetime.
I love how you've kind of touched on some things that are right down the alley of the Soul Inspired podcast, right? Because as you know, I talk to a lot of people on this podcast about people who've had near death experiences. So they have this life they're living, they leave their body, they go through this experience,
Mm,
uncovering a deeper understanding of who they are. And then they come back and they're expected to continue their life because obviously they came back and that's why they're here telling me their story.
yeah.
When you were kind of saying what you were saying there, I was thinking to myself of how many times I've had the typical story, and I just recently interviewed somebody where they were living a very difficult life. I won't get into specifics, but doing a lot of what we would consider bad things in their life. It was leading down bad choices, and life was really, really difficult, and it was getting to a really bad place, and leading to their own taking of their own life, and going into an experience and learning at a deeper core of who they were from a conscious level, not the human body, not the, I call it a meat suit, not this level, but from a bigger perspective. In this instance, they were told, you chose, and I know this sounds very difficult, right, for a lot of people to understand, and it doesn't feel right, especially when you think about what we go through in life, but that this individual was told, you chose these life experiences to deal with the difficulties, right? As you talked about with Superman that you were referencing, right? So
Mhm.
like you chose all these difficulties through your life, and in fact, there's gonna be more when you go back because you are going back. No, no, I don't want to go back. They usually don't want to come back because they're like, what was that? And it feels like this quick, almost like a dream-like state, and they don't want to come back. And this particular individual discovers, you're right, I chose all these things for myself. And I'm going to go back and there's going to be some more difficulties. But then they learn, okay, but now your awareness, you're going to go back with the awareness that you chose these difficulties. Okay, this one instance, this one person. She came back and of course kind of went back to her typical self. Then the memory started coming online of what she just experienced. Went, oh, I chose these things.
Mm.
That perspective takes ownership and it changes the actual experience. So
Yeah.
even in a terrible situation, she was able to shift from that experience faster. She was able to acknowledge this was something I needed to learn from. What am I learning from? What is it that how is it going to help me grow as a person, as a soul, as a spirit? And because she had that experience, and I say all the time, none of us want an NDE. We don't want near death experiences. We're here for a reason, and I think a lot of us we come here and we put on the shades. We can't see what we're doing, but that's part of the process is to learn. And I think many of us can sometimes break through the challenges of being a victim to all your circumstances. That's what I think we're really meant to be doing because the NDEer gets a little bit of kind of a glimpse more than many of us do because they say, "Hey, oh wow, okay, this is supposed to be happening. Okay, come back." And then their life changes a lot of times, right? When they come back because now they're making decisions a lot quicker because they can recall that memory they had in the afterlife. Here, we none of us really have that. And we get fed all these experiences and we have to make judgment calls and make decisions and feel victimized. So, I guess my question, the reason I'm bringing all this up is how does one, and this might be a difficult question because it's kind of summing it up, but how does one start to get out of the victim mentality and work deeper within themselves to learn that these experiences are something that can harness them to a better life? Like if something's terrible happening, how can you shift that around and make it something that's going to be beneficial? Is there any insight you have around that?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would say is in some ways you don't have to worry about it because it's inevitable
Mm,
that it will happen. Um, and by that I mean this, it's like, like people change when the pain of
mm,
staying in the same place or doing the same thing is actually becomes greater than doing something else.
mm,
And so like people will eventually change something. Now, what that looks like a lot in life is like, you hit rock bottom. And so, your partner leaves you. Um, you cause the death of someone. You you do something, and because of that, you wind up in prison or something, or like, you become paralyzed or something. That will definitely open up a door for people to change. And I would say we definitely don't have to go that route.
right.
Um, and I would say that the quickest way, and it's like, I would say it's meditation, but it's meditation in a different way from a lot of way people think of it. I think a lot of times people think meditation is you sit quietly, you close your eyes, you cross your legs, like you go within and stuff. And yes, I would say there's a lot of benefit to that. But here's what I call practical meditation for
Mhm.
people. It's like anyone can do this one. And it's where you say no matter what's happening, you're 100% responsible for it.
Mm,
And I think that's the most direct way of going through this process and kind of waking up and improving the life because um and that's a huge step. And that's why I say it's a meditation, because a lot of times, like, you want to blame someone. You want to blame an institution. You want to blame a politician. You want to blame your mom, your dad. You want to blame your boss or something and stuff. Like you want to blame, and the meditation is you just don't allow yourself to. And you said like I will not let myself do that. I can't. I'm 100% responsible. And it's like, try it out. And then that's why I say it's difficult. It says like my partner cheated. I'm 100% responsible for that result.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
my my dad won't talk to me. I'm 100% responsible for that result. And the thing is, I really want to explore like the difficulty of this, because if you're not careful, you can slip in this place of you're blaming yourself and you're kind of victimizing yourself and even more. It's like the whole thing of blaming the victim type stuff. And
Yeah.
so the meditation is you hold yourself 100% responsible, but without judging yourself.
Right.
That's the key. You don't judge yourself, you just accept yourself. And so, like your partner cheats, and it's like, okay, I'm 100% responsible. What does that mean? It's like, well, was I being an inspiring partner? Was I being a partner that was pulling this person towards me in a good way, like being magnetic, charming, supportive, or was I showing up in a way that was pushing this partner like away? And
Mhm.
so, a lot of times, people want to find like, what's wrong in the guidance, what's wrong in the advice. And I would say, don't do that, because yes, I mean, I can poke holes in everything I just said right now. It says, what are you 100% responsible? No way, they did this, blah, blah, blah. They didn't resolve their stuff. No, I said, but I'd say, make this work, make this model work for you. And the reason I say it's a meditation is like, it requires mental effort, because like you won't want to do it, because when you start saying, well, I'm 100% responsible, you really start seeing the places where, yeah, you you're really falling down on the job. You're really not taking care of yourself. You're really not paying attention
Mhm.
to things. And so I would have people start there, but I want to emphasize this is like a big thing.
Oh
So it's
yeah.
like a little bit of verbiage, a little bit of guidance, but it can really take the rest of your life to master.
Yeah.
Um, but I would also say if you do that, the payoff for that, you can't even imagine how good your life will be if you just take 100% responsibility.
Yeah. So I love how you said to take the responsibility, but not to victimize yourself
Hmm.
and to sit in that, because it's more about taking the responsibility just because you can make changes too. And not
Hmm.
everything is an end game, right? Whether it's a relationship with your spouse, your kids, your whatever it is, there's always a way to try to come back from that in whatever way is meant to shape itself out in that life, in your life, right? And as
Yeah.
long as you're taking that responsibility, then you're healing from that internally instead
Yeah.
of just victimizing and sitting in self-pity, because that doesn't really get you anywhere. So I love that. Did you again, going back to the consciousness part of it, we talked in the beginning about the near-death experience. Did you have you had interest in that, or is it just more that when you work with people, you can see that there's much more going on with them than just the physical life?
Well, as I said, like I I do like my cognitive thing,
Yeah.
so maybe I overuse it, but I say I like models, but I always like try to extrapolate. I try to think, suppose of like a bigger picture, and
Hmm.
the other thing is there's that phrase like the world is only as you perceive it, and so like I think people's heads, my heads are really just filled with stories,
Hmm.
and so I try to tell myself stuff. Not that, I mean, if it's true, great. But at the same time, I can sit here and say, like, I don't really know if I have like that great ability to like know truth. But I I I do have a good ability to tell myself good stories. And so what I try all the time is just to switch out the stories I have in my head for like better stories. And what is a better story? a better story is something that is more like empowering to myself. And so empowering means like, I feel stronger, I feel more expansive, I feel more capable. The thing is, and this is the reason why I said like I try to fill my head with better stories. A lot of these stories come from, in some ways, how I have fashioned an understanding of reality. Because I always felt like yes, there is something bigger like going on. Like for example, there's this book, Journey of Souls.
Yep. I know that one.
Uh,
Yep.
it's a phenomenal book. It's about this guy, psychiatrist, hypnotherapist, he does a bunch of past life regressions. He talks about people's lives between lives and stuff. Like I really enjoyed the book, but I couldn't finish it
Mm.
because I was reading it and I was like, yeah, makes sense. And that was it. I mean, it was it's like I fully bought into it. And I says, yeah, and I remember kind of chuckling when I read it. I said, yeah, that kind of sums up the way I thought things worked, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Which if you read the book, it's really a ridiculous perspective to have.
Hmm.
But I just felt most of the book was like redundant. I was like, yeah, I get it. And so um with that type perspective I have, that story I have going around in my head, yeah, I mean, near-death experiences have just intrinsic common sense to me and stuff.
Hmm.
In the sense of like, well, yeah, I mean, like if you had died, you would have gone to like this in between place, and all the struggles that you experience here, and the density and the heaviness and everything that you thought was so hard, you're going to see in a much broader context, and
Hmm.
you're gonna see how all this was happening for you, that you chose it. This was kind of like your tailor-made curriculum that you put together in order to advance like your soul along. But the thing is, like you didn't, and so you got a chance to kind of, it's like rise up and get that nice like high like 100,000 foot view. You can look down and see everything. You're like, oh, I'm here. And then you go back down below the clouds and you get closer to the ground and then you're back in it. But you remember that you were up here.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I really enjoy hearing about the experiences, and I also feel like, yeah, there it is again, that commonality between them, that getting the greater context, feeling much more expanded, feeling like they want to stay in
Hmm.
that place, but then understanding that they need to come back for some type of reason. What I also feel is pretty common, and I think, I'm trying to even incorporate this into my own life. I feel, there are stages in life where like you complete one floor and then you get to another one and you work on
Hmm.
that and you complete one floor and you go up. And sometimes there overlap, but it's the coming back and understanding, oh, I'm supposed to do this thing in service to other people,
Hmm.
which I think within the human experience is probably, and again, it's just a story I tell myself. Could be true, cannot be true, but I'd say the service, being here and wanting to be in service to other people is probably like the highest form of, I don't know, we can say consciousness or highest form of order for like a being, because it just makes sense, right? It's like, well, at the lower level, food, clothing, shelter, you got to take care of that. But then you move up this pyramid, or you move up the floors, and then you get to a point where like you're good. You feel good about yourself, you love yourself. It's like, you actually don't need anything, and like you don't need what a lot of people are really searching for. You don't need validation for other people. You don't need like assurance from other people. In fact, you don't even need love from other people
Hmm.
because you're filled with it. People like I've worked with that I would say probably much further along than I am. They also say something that's pretty common. They say, and I've heard it from several different people, I am love. And so they recognize like what I call like the true essence. I think we all are love, but most of us don't know that.
Right.
And while we're in this illusory, delusional state of not knowing that we are love, then that's when we go through the world trying to see things outside of ourselves to help us
Hmm.
feel more complete. But once we feel that we're complete, it's like, well, I mean, sure, you tell me you love me, that's great, it feels good and everything else, but I don't need you to tell me that. In fact,
Hmm.
like I already know what love is. And I already know the way that you interact with me, the way that you look at me, the way that you talk to me. I already know if there's love embedded in that interaction or there isn't.
Right. I love talking about love. What I love what you just said. One of the nice things that I've even just getting to know you in this 1 hour here is that you're very to the point and straight with what you're saying. And one of the things you just said was you read this book. You didn't read it right through, but you read a good portion of it. Yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah.
kind of it validated maybe some things, but it wasn't like a life-altering event or anything. And one interesting thing that I found with talking with so many people who've had NDEs, when I really dig in deep about the effect it had on their life, did it cause a massive effect on their life? It did. But a lot of them will say, well, I kind of knew this. Like I felt this before. And sometimes it has nothing to do with their religious upbringing or anything. There's just this knowingness of what they experienced. Like they felt like, well, of course, that probably is what happens. And that's where I get fascinated is like, where's that knowingness coming from? It is kind of like being in a delusional or I always think of like the Men in Black movie, where they hit the light and your memory's wiped, right? It feels like we come here, the memory's wiped, but there's like this something in the background that's always kind of on us. And if you look at all our life events, it kind of relates to what we're doing here. And there'll be moments when you'll be almost like a memory will come back online. That's at least the way I'm feeling it. And as you kind of get older and mature more and understand, and you have life lessons hit you, you become more aware of it. Now, not all of us are like that. There are plenty of people who go their whole life and they don't seem to maybe get to that next floor because you're talking about kind of like those different stages. I don't think all of us quite get to those next floors. And sometimes I think that's why the NDE happens. I'm not saying all NDEers have an NDE because they need to have that shakeup, but there are plenty of them who will say to me, number one, it was the best thing that ever happened in my life because my trajectory was not good. And number two, I needed that. And I'll be
Mhm.
like, how can you sit there and tell after such a horrific event, how can you say that? You
Huh.
know, that says a lot. That is powerful, right? Because most people would not want to experience something that some of these people have had to go through. So I just appreciate your honesty in it and that you said it like it made sense to you. Instead of kind of going down the rabbit hole of, oh, wow, like it's mystical and it was more like, yeah, of course, this makes sense,
Yeah.
right? But you're here, right? We're here and we're
Yeah.
doing the work here. And I think that's what's making you're more you're grounded is the way I would put it. Like you're grounded to here. You're currently here with me. We're having this conversation in this moment in time, and you're respecting that. But at the same time, you're also respecting the idea that we are much bigger than what I think we give ourselves credit for. That's what I kind of got at what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say absolutely. I always tell myself, and sometimes I share this with my clients, like I don't feel anything happens, chaotically. I mean, I feel everything is very connected, very intertwined. Now, our ability to perceive it might be limited. I think I read recently something about weather prediction models, and I think I'm not sure it was like 6 days or 8 days or something, but that used to be like the normal thing.
Hmm.
They put all the data in and they built their models, and they could have good confidence in what it would be 6 or 8 days from now. I think now they've worked up to maybe like 13 or 14 days,
Right.
um, which is great. But all it just tells us is that yes, there's predictive capability, and like things work in a certain predictable way, like nearly all the time. And when they don't, it means like no, not that it was chaotic. It just means wait, there's something I'm missing in my perception. And so most of us like walking around. I mean, we can't, bring in like the millions of variables in and like do all the calculations and stuff. But like I always know that's going on like out there,
Hmm.
or that's my take on it. And so I also feel if you look at something long enough, you'll see a pattern. Like,
Hmm.
if you raise your child, you may not see much, but if you have like a couple of children, you might see some commonality. But let's say you're a school teacher and you do it for 30 years, then you'll have a lot to say about how like most children act, and you'll be able to say like, yeah, that kid's like this, that kid's like this. I've seen it before and everything else. And so,
Hmm.
I've worked with a lot of people, and so I say, oh yeah, there's patterns, and but not even just with people. I just say, the world itself. There's patterns, and then there's like cycles. Historians will say, or maybe not historians, but yeah, yeah, they said, history happens in cycles. Are, people who don't know their history, they're doomed to repeat it. And so I always allow for a much, much, much bigger picture. And I think this is where the grounding comes in because, you know, I I actually I'm very enthused. People want to tell me that, they remember a time there were aliens, they were a certain star group, they were a star seed. They spent time underneath the earth with Middle Earth people and stuff. Because I want to hear it, because all they're telling me is like this is part of their reality. And if I really want to understand them, I need to understand like their reference point, their reality they're coming from.
Hmm.
And at the end of the day, outside of all the stories, what really brings it to a point is, so what do you want? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to create? And I feel like in this reality, as I understand it, I'm very capable of helping people work with like the here and now. And so the picture is yes, infinite, but it's
Hmm.
like, what do you want? And people want to be happy. They want to feel peace inside. What they want to be in their natural state, which is having a tremendous amount of peace. They want to feel good about themselves, or they want to accept themselves. And
Hmm.
so I know that's what people want. So along the way, I say, well, if you think getting a better job is going to give this to you, well, let's get you the better job. Because a lot of us, we need to have the experience of working to get something and then receiving
Hmm.
to understand what that really means to us. And
Right.
so, the end result is, and I can tell everyone this, but it won't make a difference because we still need to have the experience. I still need to have the experience. It's like what you really want is become the person you think you need to be in order to have that thing.
Hmm.
So, sure, let's work on you having the best relationship ever. Let's work on you having like amazing like intimacy and stuff. And then in the work along the way, you're going to surface the things that prevent you from being that person, which is going to bring that relief. It's going to bring that lightness, and it's going to bring you closer to that person. And then, of course, that thing will still show up. But I find a lot of times when my clients say they want things, it's like they're much happier becoming the person they want to be, and frequently they let go of the thing that they were pursuing because they said like I don't need it anymore. I'm not interested in it.
I love how you were talking about the patterns, and you've worked with people for so long that you see patterns. Same thing with me with coaching music, because I've been doing it 12 years now, 10, 12 years now. The moment I can see or recognize a pattern that's coming on, I can attack it quicker
Yeah,
because I've already done it before. And then so sometimes when I get a new client now or a new student now, I'll say, "You're kind of lucky that you started with me now and not when I started 10 years ago." Not that it didn't work in 10 years ago, but it was almost like we were kind of riding this show together. Now it's like, "Oh, I already see it.
yeah,
So we can go after it now." And the reason I'm talking about that is then you were talking, and you won't lose my audience, trust me. The Soul Inspired is very open to concepts that are beyond this world, let's say. So when you were talking about star people and all these different things, right? And but the stories that people bring up to you, one of my newest interests outside of spiritual coaching and things like this now is hypnosis and around like Dolores Cannon, quantum, the hypnosis in between lives, past lives, that kind of stuff, regression. Mainly because from a micro level in this world, if we have patterns that we follow, I sometimes wonder from a macro level of our soul consciousness if we follow patterns, meaning, are we sometimes coming to this life? This is just where I'm at right now. Are we sometimes coming to this life following in patterns from a previous life or a multi-dimensional life? Are we having things come up here that we may have experienced on another plane? You know, when I start talking to people who've had these experiences, I mean, my mind opens up to all these possibilities. So sometimes that's why I really believe, like, I love the hypnosis part of it because we're going more into our subconscious to say, is there a memory we don't recall right now that is affecting us here? And can we work on that? And that's like a brand new, exciting journey that I'm kind of just getting on myself. But it has to do with patterns, and it has to do with kind of coming in and saying, okay, take ownership of the pattern, but do you want to keep doing it? It's the same sense where I'm sure you said you work with people with relationships. How many people have relationships where they're in this horrific abusive relationship, they leave it, and then they have another one, and they do it again. And then they're looking at their friend, they're saying, well, my friend didn't have one. That she's been happy for 15 years, has 4 kids, and is married. Like, why me? Why am I having these three different, why is this, what's going on? So then it's like, we have to acknowledge, why does that pattern keep coming up? Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, is this any of this making sense? It's just kind of, I'm looking at it from the macro level, obviously, and that's really out there, woo woo, it's whatever it is. But I can see us being a much bigger, you know, it's just there could be more going on around us. And sometimes when we're having these patterns, they might not even be from our childhood. They might be from something else we have to really dig into a little deeper from a more unconscious level.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's all these things are coming to mind as you're talking about this. I'm trying to like dig in a certain like place in it, but for sure, we've got things coming in from our childhood. We've got things coming in from past generations. We've got things
Right.
coming in from past lives. There's that phrase what says like until you learn the lesson, like you're going to repeat the cycle. And
Mm,
it's like the unlock happens like when you learn the lesson. Let's say you're a people pleaser. Once you learn like the the better way of doing things beyond people pleasing, then you're not going to be in those circumstances anymore. And so a lot of times when you're at the people pleasing, you're going to attract people who are manipulative or want to take from you. They're takers, take advantage of you, that type thing. But when you're not a people pleaser, you go beyond that. People who like to manipulate people, or that's just kind of like their nature. Like you're not going to meet those people anymore. They won't even come into
right.
your life
Yes.
because like there's no longer that like energetic match.
Mm-hmm.
And so um yeah, it's so on the one hand, I always say it's like assume something's true and also assume it's not true simultaneously and look at it, say from both angles. So from the one side, I just say it's life existence is just nothing but patterns.
Mm,
It's almost like say everything it's very works very much like physics in the sense it's like things only happen in very, very precise, defined ways. So if I have strong boundaries and I have strong standards, my life is going to look very different from someone who has poor boundaries and poor standards or doesn't even know what that is. And
mm-hmm.
so, um, like they always say like if you want to know what's going on with you, just look at your circumstances. If you have a lot of money in the bank, that means that that's a result of a pattern. If you're homeless, it means that's a result of a pattern and stuff. And the place I have people put emphasis on, yes, we are actually entangled in larger patterns, but what we should obsess on is what we can do about our own patterns. Because
Mm,
as soon as you say, well, it's because of the man that's doing this, or it's because of this institution, or the politicians. I mean, I won't discount that. Let's say there's truth and veracity to that, but it's like, but you have no power there.
right. Yeah.
So focus on what you can change. And
Hmm.
maybe one day you can become so powerful that you can actually take a role or an effect in that larger pattern. But first things first, work on your own patterns. And I would say from a larger context, if you take the universe in total, the universe wants what it wants. And what does it want? It's always going for like higher levels of order. And so like that's happening on the macro and that's happening on the micro. And so in the micro, it's very easy to know if we're at a higher level order state is if we check in with ourselves and says, is there peace here? Is there calmness? Is there stability? That's how we know we reach the place of order within ourselves and order like in our life. And so when we have anxiety about how our friends treat us, or we have angst about some trip that's upcoming, or we have some fear about taking the next step, that's disorder. And so all it's telling us is that at a higher order state, when we reach a higher order state, and usually it's an internal resolution, it's internal refinement, then we're going to be um, at a place where we no longer have that experience of those emotions. Because when we have angst and fear and shame, in some ways, it's keeping something out of our life. It's like a block to something. And then once we get to the peace and calm, then it's a place of expansion and it allows other things to come into our life. And so, yeah. So our job, the very practical, is just doing whatever we can to reach internal peace, calm, and stability, like internally and externally.
Hmm.
Um, that's what we can do now for fun stuff. We can look outside of ourselves and we can say, well, what are some of the larger patterns going on, and make suppositions about that, or ponder that, or see how that might be something we might be able to shift like within our own lives and stuff. And you see some people that do it, like they're so masterful in some ways, not in alls. Like you'll see private equity firms, the way they invest. You'll hear about BlackRock a lot. Elon Musk and stuff. Like they in some ways, not in all, but in some ways they've reached a certain level of order or sophistication that they can affect patterns much larger than just themselves as individuals.
Hmm.
Um, and I think all of us have that capability, but we have to first refine it within ourselves. And then when we refine it within ourselves, we also have the ability to do something that's very powerful, which is partner and collaborate with other powerful people.
Hmm.
And because, it's like that phrase, like the 1+1, when you're working with other conscious beings who are also like doing the work and working on refining themselves and stuff, the 1+1, it doesn't equal two, it equals 10, it equals 100.
You mentioned when you were talking about the patterns, there's a couple things really quickly here. You talked about the generational patterns. You talked about, right, all these things that we can. I was having like vision. So I get visual and I
Mm.
was seeing either being chained down to our circumstances, like I like shackles and chains, like, okay, yes, generational, or okay, well, because I had that in my past, or my great grandfather dealt with this, I'm still dealing with the repercussions of that, or those types of things. That feels very chained down, right? You can't do anything about that. And then on the other side of it, I saw an individual who had awareness of it. So it's just It's just understanding the awareness of it. Because I don't want to say only be able to change the things we can control, because then we get into a control place too, and we can't control everything, right? So it's more about have the awareness that you're not the victim to it, and
Hmm.
that you can make different decisions based on it. Because, like you said so many times, that those things just stop showing up then. Once you are aware of it and you you understand it's not yours to own, you learn from the pattern or you learn from it, and then all of a sudden you start noticing it's no longer showing up because you know it no longer holds you down with that chain. And that's so I had this like visual of the person over here who's chained down, the other person who's like, oh, okay, I'm aware that this is going on. I'm going to be able to do what I can do within my circumstances and learn from it and then grow from it. And then all of a sudden, there's like the change just break. It's like
Yeah.
there's no cycle that needs to keep continuing. And if we
Yeah.
keep doing that, it's like that's a tough place to be when you keep holding yourself down. I loved everything you said there. And then partnering up with other powerful people, that is something I think that we're all shifting into. I think, as I've said this with doing the Soul Inspired, I have never in my life, I mean, I've always felt this way at certain points with my music and my music students and stuff. But there's many times where I'll be speaking with someone that I'm interviewing, like yourself or someone, and I'm like, oh my God, it's my people. You start to kind of like find your people the more aware you are of your passions and your drive and the things that feel good within you. Instead of fighting
Hmm.
against the current, you're just like floating down that river that's just moving. And all of a sudden you're like, hey, bud, hey, I know you. I know you. And it's like you just start to be like, oh my God. And it's such a good feeling. And so encouraging people to do that, because that's how you do partner up with other powerful people who are have the same vision and goals as you and the same uh, ideas. I just wanted to throw that in there because when you said that, I was seeing that in your personal practice. I want to know, how do people get in contact with you? Um, just do you have a website, or are you very private? I didn't dig into where you were. I couldn't find too much on you, so I'm just curious how people get in contact with you.
Speaking of having more order, I could be better in the marketing side. So I would say probably the best, most direct way is just send me an email. I mean, it's so archaic, but it's Dominic, Dominic, at innerpeaceadvisor.com. And the other way, you can go to Instagram, same handle, Inner Peace Advisor. You can send me a direct message. And if
Okay.
there's any women in particular that are interested in my group program, there's a website called Explore with Dominic that they can go to, and they can self-schedule a call with me and we can talk.
Thank you so much for coming on. I have one last question for you. I leave everybody with at the very end of the show just to see everybody's perspectives. You did touch on it with a brief little, I think it was like a one sentence or a couple sentences of it, but I wanted to know. I always ask everybody from a grand scheme, not just Dominic, not just me. It's 2025. Here we are in 2025. We have all these humans, 8 billion of us, or however many billions are here on this earth. What is our grand purpose as to why we're here? What are we coming here collaboratively to do? What is our purpose to incarnate? If the afterlife is so grand and we can kind of just do whatever, why would we come here and do this?
I'll answer it in an expansive way. It's kind of like a way of being playful with people. I don't know if they'll be able to do much with it, but who cares? We are here to grow, to evolve, to become more conscious, to explore ourselves, and the we in this case is we are existence. We are the totality of everything, and so the greatest thing that we could do for ourselves is to know ourselves better. And so on the micro, the individual, the best thing you can do is to gain self-awareness. And on the macro, the we, when I say we are all of existence, it's the same thing. What we want to do, or we as one want to do, is to know ourselves better. And the way we do that is we have all of these different micro experiences through 8 billion people going through all these different little micro realities that essentially allow us to understand what is existence, what is living, what is being one and connected, what that all means. And we do it in the doing, not not just in the sitting. We do it by actually going through the experiences
Mm.
and learning whatever we learn.
I love that. I love the answer. You kind of did go more expansive with it, so that's what I was thinking you were going to go there with that. So, but in the grand scheme of things, is to know ourselves better
Mhm.
and to continue to evolve, essentially. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciated it.
My
I uh,
pleasure.
I really enjoyed the conversation. It went in as I said, it always goes into different directions, and sometimes I kind of have like a vision of where it's going, and I had some questions I had written out. We got through some of them, and then the other ones I was like, no, I want to go this way with it. So I really appreciate just you sharing your knowledge. And I would encourage all the audience out there, if you're interested in what Dominic shares, to reach out to him. I'll put the links in the bio and everything. Please continue to like, share, and subscribe to the Soul Inspired. If this episode spoke to you or you think it would speak to someone, please share it with someone you know. And again, Dominic, thank you so much for coming on the Soul Inspired.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
So